This is the entire history of the League of Legends Mid-Season Invitational. Since its inception all the way back in 2015, MSI has served as the counterpart to Worlds in terms of showcasing the best talent League of Legends esports has to offer across all of its regions. And with this year's tournament just around the corner, now is the perfect time to rewind 8 years into the past to figure out how MSI has grown from a 4-day event to a full-scale tournament that lasts almost a month long. So without further ado, let's dive into it. In an effort to create some sort of small-scale international competition to lead up to Worlds, Riot in 2015 introduced the Mid-Season Invitational. This competition was held in Tallahassee, Florida, and was a 16 tournament held over the course of 4 days, featuring the winners from 5 regions as well as the champion of the Mid-Season International Wildcard Invitational. Competing in this first ever MSI, we saw the regional champions SKT, Fnatic, EDG, TSM, AHQ, as well as Beşiktaş, a Turkish team that had won the wildcard slot. Back then, the formatting didn't require dedicated video for explanation and instead operated a lot more simply. Beginning with a group stage, each team would face each other once and the top 4 teams would advance to the best of 5's knockout stage. From there, the 1 and 4 seeds as well as the 2 and 3 seeds would face each other with their respective winners going on to the finals, and of course the winner of that series would be crowned the champion. In the group stage, unsurprisingly, we saw the 2 teams representing minor regions get knocked out. That's right, Beşiktaş and TSM. Headed into the knockout stage, SKT had beaten every team in the tournament, going 5-0 in the group stage. However, they went an additional 5 games against Fnatic and ultimately won that series 3-2. Meanwhile, in the other semifinals, EDG swept AHQ 3-0 with players such as Deft, who of course won Worlds just this past year, and their support Mako, who would go on to win Worlds in 2021. But as for the finals, EDG scraped out a 3-2 victory over SKT, including a particularly noteworthy Game 5. Going into the final game of the tournament, Faker had never lost a professional game on LeBlanc, being 12-0 on the champion, but knowing this, EDG intentionally left her open and drafted a comp specifically to counter Faker, which would ultimately win them the title. And not only did this year's MSI have a tournament between professional teams, but in addition to that, it held an exhibition match of league personalities with casters on Team Demacia versus pro players on Team Noxus. Both teams were only allowed to play champs from their respective regions of Runeterra, and for those wondering, yes, the Dark Hearts of Noxus won. Unfortunately, this would be the only exhibition match in MSI history, as the following year didn't have one. However, the group stage would double its number of games to 10 while otherwise keeping the same format. This year's tournament was held in Shanghai, China, and lasted 11 days as opposed to the 4 days from the year prior. And as for the group stage, one thing that may seem like a typo nowadays was that CLG actually placed second above T1 and only 1 game behind RNG. However, heading into the group stage, both SKT and CLG would beat their respective opponents 3-1, and SKT managed to score a perfect game against RNG to advance to the finals. And unsurprisingly, SKT would go on to smash CLG in a clean sweep to win the championship. And as a bit of additional trivia, for those who didn't know, SKT in 2016 holds the record for the only team to ever have the International Grand Slam in winning both MSI and Worlds in the same season. And in fact, they had actually won 3 of the 4 possible titles they could have won that season, but fell short in the LCK Summer Playoffs, meaning that a team has still yet to complete a season-long Grand Slam to this day. And now, though this year didn't bring too much change to the tournament, 2017's Brazil birthed the framework of what many of us League fans have known the tournament for the past few years. Firstly, we had the introduction of Conqueror skins, and the first skin, of course, was Conqueror Karma. And during the research for this video, I not only learned how Conqueror skins are chosen, but also how championship ones are too. So in case you didn't already know, each year's Conqueror skin is chosen for a champion that had a high presence at the prior Worlds, and each year's championship skin is now chosen for a champion that held a high presence at the prior MSI. But returning to the new format for 2017's MSI, this year there would be 13 teams, more than double the previous years. The bottom 8 teams would be placed into 2 pools based on perceived strength, and the winner from each pool's double round robins would play against either the LCS or LMS. Of those 4 teams, the top 3 would move on to the group stage, where there was one group of 6 teams just like years prior. After the group had been played out and Flash Wolves had Goomba stomped TSM in their tiebreaker game, G2 would beat Team WE and SKT would sweep the aforementioned Flash Wolves to set up for a Korean versus European finals, a first in the tournament's history. And setting a standard that still applies to this day, of course, SKT won handily. Well, this standard actually did take a brief break in 2018, as instead of SKT being sent to the tournament, we received the representative Kingzone Dragon X. And as for the tournament's formatting, it was similar to the year prior, with just one extra team this time around for a total of 14 teams in the tournament, which took place in both Berlin, Germany and Paris, France. The group stage of 6 was less top dominated than the prior year, as teams were relatively even in their records, as well as Doublelift proving that he could be knocked out with a 4-6 record on 2 different teams in back-to-back years. After the group stage had concluded, RNG would sweep Fnatic 3-0 in the semifinals, while Kingzone Dragon X took down the Flash Wolves 3-1, a scoreline they would find themselves on the opposite side of, as they were taken down in just 4 games against RNG in the finals. A finals that would go on to become one of the most viewed series in esports history, with 127 million unique viewers and over 2 billion hours of watch time. But even though the teams that featured the best performance in 2018's MSI were the Eastern teams, us Western fans finally got our chance in the spotlight when it came to 2019's tournament. The number of teams was slightly dialed back this year, going from 14 to 13, but the formatting would remain for its final iteration at MSI. In the group stage, reigning champions IG dominated the field, going 9-1 and only dropping their one game to the second place team SKT, while G2 and Team Liquid managed to hold their own and secure the 3rd and 4th slots. But what came as a surprise to many was that not only did G2 manage to beat SKT 3-2 and advance to the finals, but the 4-6 Team Liquid beat the nearly undefeated reigning world champions IG in a 3-1 series. For the first time ever, the West was guaranteed victory at MSI, as Team Liquid and G2 would face off in a series that would become the fastest international best-of-5 series ever, as G2 stomped Team Liquid in games that lasted 25 minutes, 28 minutes, and the last one being just 18 minutes long. A combined total of around 71 minutes of game time for an MSI final. Now, as we all probably guessed, there was no MSI in 2020, as the entire world was kind of on lockdown during that time, so instead Riot opted to do a mid-season streamathon, with the money from it going towards charity to fight the virus. As for the East, Korea and China would each send 4 teams to compete in a mini tournament with an MSI-inspired format that would ultimately crown the reigning world champions Fun plus Phoenix as the winner. Similarly, the PCS and BCS combined their efforts in their own tournament, which saw Talon Esports, now known as PSG Talon, take home the title. Europe featured teams with casters, personalities, and players from the same country, while North America had some exhibition matches as well as some randomized teams featuring spicy picks such as Teemo mid lane. Overall, the event itself was for fun and for the sake of charity at the end of the day, so while it was a bummer that MSI couldn't be held in 2020, this was a solid alternative for such short notice. But of course, once we were able to return to the MSI we know and love, international competition headed to Iceland with a new format, 11 teams, and no more play-ins. With the exception of Vietnam due to travel restrictions, the 11 competing teams would be divided into 3 groups, with the top 2 winners of each group making it through to the Rumble stage. From there, we once again returned to the MSI Classic, of each team playing each other twice within this group of 6, and the top 4 teams advancing on to the knockout stage. Now, during this Rumble stage, unsurprisingly, reigning world champions Damwon Kia finished at the top of the pack, followed by RNG. However, what was perhaps most unexpected was that PSG Talon from the PCS League took the 3rd place slot, with Mad Lions in 4th. And much to the disappointment of North American fans, this meant that Cloud9 would be making an unplanned early flight home. So with the top 4 teams advancing to the knockout stage, we were treated to a 5-game series in which Damwon Kia powered through the Mad Lions in their semi-final, and while it shouldn't have come as a surprise that RNG won their series against PSG Talon, it still did go to 4 games. But as for the finals, despite being the reigning world champions, Damwon Kia would fall to RNG in Silver Scrapes, as the finals lasted the full 5 games. So after this amazing finals, we now finally arrive at MSI 2022, which competed last year in Busan, South Korea, and invited the 11 Spring Split winners across the regions, and thankfully for the BCS, they could send their representative this year. The format remained the same for last year, but probably for the last time, as there were some complaints about the number of best of ones as opposed to series play. But regardless, what was especially notable was the dominance of the first place teams in their respective groups. T1 went 6-0, RNG also went 6-0, and G2 with a group of 3 went 8-0. Heading into the Rumble stage, these 3 teams emerged as the top 3 seeds. However, after the Rumble stage concluded, G2 and EG both sat at 5 wins apiece. And despite the efforts of Saigon Buffalo and PSG Talon, unfortunately they were unable to make it through. But with the hope the West had of being amongst Korea and China in the semifinals, they would receive a rude awakening as RNG swept EG and T1 swept G2. And though it was a close fought 5-game finals, RNG ultimately claimed their 3rd MSI trophy and beat T1 in doing so. And unfortunately for T1, they would go on to finish second at both international events in 2022. Also, it was my birthday last week, so if you're feeling generous, an awesome gift would be to tap that subscribe button to keep supporting my free content. So now that you're caught up with the standard history of MSI's past, I hope you feel ready, prepared for the tournament, and watching another year of Eastern teams stomp everyone else. But yeah, I don't gotta keep you around any longer, so that being said, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, and yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later!